Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 67, Kim Ruyle Cultivates Trust. Here's a shout out to listeners in South Carolina, in particular Swansea, Charleston, Fort Mill, Myrtle Beach, Spartanburg, Simpsonville, Hilton Head, Greenville, Clemson, and Rock Hill. With that, let's get started. When he isn't helping businesses build their leadership pipeline or overhaul their performance management system, Kim is writing and directing plays over Zoom and soon in person. He is an international consultant, speaker, learning and development expert with decades of practical and evidence-based experience. I've had the opportunity to hear Kim speak twice in Charlotte for some chapters, and I was amazed at what he had to say. He is well-versed in leadership and learning and development, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say in the future. Part 1. Pay attention. You could probably read my book, What the Heck is Leadership and Why Should I Care, in about 2 hours. In those 2 hours, you will have read roughly 50 stories about leadership. Now that I know something about leadership, I archive these types of stories as I run across them, whether it's reflecting on my past or what occurs as I consult with businesses, or even from these podcasts. I archive and retain these stories so I can illustrate to someone some aspect of leadership. In this story, Kim reminds me of what I'm doing with something he shares that might get you thinking a little bit differently as you experience things. Here's Kim with this story.
A sentence someone has given to me that's really changed my life. And I've had a number of those over the years. And I pay attention to things when as a writer and a coach and a leadership consultant, I pay attention to the behavior and actions and words of other people. I was working at a leadership consultancy, and we were working on competency modeling and trying to identify behaviors and what things look like for a particular competence. So for instance, if you take something like strategic agility, what does that really look like? And this mentor of mine said, as I was struggling to come up with something, he said, play the tapes. And I looked at him quizzically, and he said, if you're paying attention in life, your brain is recording all kinds of things. You've got tons of examples in there. You just got to pay attention to those things and recall them. For some reason, that really struck me as really important, and I've taken that really to heart. So I pay attention to words people say, to actions they take. Basically, what it's done is it's given me a huge library of stories to illustrate points and to create analogies for people. And that's one of the things as a coach that you need to do is, you take some kind of nebulous construct, whether it's being authentic or being confident or being an engaging, inspiring, motivating leader. Do you have stories to illustrate those things? Can you bring it down to something that's really actionable? And this line of play the tapes, that has really served me well and it requires that, you're paying attention, that you're reflecting often. You are kind of consciously cataloging those experiences and then creating lessons from those. In fact, there was a book written years ago called Lessons from Experience, part of a study by the Center of Creative Leadership. And it led to this construct of learning agility, which is really about learning from experience and being able to apply it to new challenging situations. And so I associate that line, play the tapes, with that whole construct. So that's something that's been very useful for me.
You just described, I think, the show, Unlabeled Leadership, which is trying to take those labels when we use them and break them down into actions. What you experience when listening to these podcasts are really examples of leading and showing leadership without necessarily using the words, or it's deliberately trying to give examples of a particular concept. One of them that you mentioned, authenticity. There's a lot of buzz about what is authentic leadership.
Right.
Okay, what's the difference between authentic leadership and being authentic?
Right.
I don't know.
Well, that's a great thing to consider, and the whole line about fake it till you make it. I mean, people want to follow a strong, confident, capable leader, but sometimes you don't feel that. But that's what people need. So if I stand up and I project confidence, am I being inauthentic? No, I'm just doing my job as a leader. I'm doing what needs to be done. And anyway, that's my view about that. There's a great story about Sidney Pollack, an Oscar-winning director. He's actually trained classically as an actor, and many people recognize him from movies as character roles. I read an interview from him about him when he was asked to direct his first film. He was scared to death because he thought, I don't know how to direct. I've never been taught to direct, but I know how to act. And so what I can do is I can just treat this as a role. And so what he did is he showed up on the set the first day and he dressed like he thought a director should dress. And he showed up and he played it as a role.
Oh, wow.
And he kind of grew into that. Now, is that being inauthentic? I don't think so. You learn by doing. I mean, that's one of this whole 70-20-10 principles. Most of what we learn for success in life, we learn by doing a job. We don't really learn when we're in a comfort zone. And so when we get out of our comfort zone, a lot of times we're acting. That's not being inauthentic. That's just being a learner and stepping up to do what a leader needs to do.
I like the distinction between acting and learning, or the connection between the two to show authenticity.
Right.
I think it's great.
Right.
Part 2, high degree of trust. If you work in a culture where there's a high level of trust, you know you're doing something right. To build that trust, there's some things you need to do. And in this story, Kim explains or exemplifies a couple of those things. Here's Kim.
Well, this story is about another person who stepped up and showed some leadership, and then how it affected me and the team that I was leading. It started, this was 15 years ago, maybe almost 20 years ago, and I was facilitating an offsite workshop. The topic was performance management. How do you set goals? How do you coach people and give performance reviews? And that whole thing about what we call performance management. We all know what that is. And it takes different forms in different organizations. Most people hate it.
Oh, yeah.
Managers usually hate it worse than employees. I mean, they'd rather have a root canal than sit down with an employee and deliver an end-of-year performance appraisal. So I'm facilitating this workshop, and there's about 30 people in the room with a number of companies represented. I was a vice president of this leadership firm delivering this workshop. And there was a young lady who was brand new to our company who was co-facilitating with me. She was several layers down in the organization. I had been part of the hiring process, but I'd never worked with her until this day. And so I'm up in front of the room. Her name was Vicky, and Vicky's there in the room with me, of course, up front. And I'm facilitating, and I was trying to address this construct of feedback. What is feedback? How do you give effective feedback, and so forth? And so I asked the question, and I didn't mean it as a rhetorical question. I was really serious. I was looking for a particular answer. I said, what is feedback? And a lady in the back of the room raised her hand, and I called on her, and she says, it's a gift. And that answer just kind of went right over my head. It wasn't exactly what I was expecting. So I just said, okay, someone else. And then I eventually got the answer I was looking for. And that feedback is information that follows some kind of behavior that enables you to adjust your performance and improve your performance or your behavior, that kind of thing. That's what I was looking for, kind of a textbook definition.
Yeah.
Anyway, we come up to a break, and Vicky came up and she literally tugged on my shirt sleeve and she said, I need to talk to you out in the hallway. And we went out in the hallway, and she got right in my face and she said, do you realize what you did in there? And keep in mind now, she's new to the organization. She works for somebody who works for me, right? Yeah. And I said, no, I didn't know what she was talking about. She says, you completely dismissed that woman. I still had no idea what she was talking about. I said, you have to tell me more. She said, you asked a question. You asked, what is feedback? Yeah, I remembered that. Okay, I'm still not getting it. You got an answer. Feedback is a gift. Okay, and I'm looking a little bit puzzled. She says, don't you get it? Feedback is a gift, like I'm giving to you right now.
Oh.
And it was just like a 2x4 on the side of the head. And I was so impressed with her courage and directness to give me that feedback about the whole construct of feedback, right? And the lights went on for me. And of course, I realized that I had dismissed that woman. It was totally unintentional. But anyway, that's what happened. So the next day I get back in the office and I bring the whole team together, the people who report to me and the next level down. So all the people that are responsible for me. It was a good sized team with all of them there. And I said, I want to let everybody know what happened yesterday. And I want to recognize Vicky. And then I told the story. And I said, that is exactly what I needed. And that is exactly what we need as a team. We need to give each other gifts of feedback. Now, that whole line of feedback as a gift has kind of become a trope, but I'd never heard it. This was 15 or 20 years ago. At that point, I'd never heard it. Now, since then, I've heard other people saying that feedback is a gift. So maybe people listening to this podcast have heard that before, but keep in mind, this was new for me hearing that. But I said to the team, this is going to be our culture. We're going to be a feedback-rich culture. We're going to give each other gifts. And we took that really seriously. Now, you can't really do that if there's not an atmosphere of psychological safety, right? So the leader has to show some vulnerability and be willing to admit mistakes and accept feedback in order to kind of promote that within the team. You also need a high degree of trust in a team. That's one of the bedrock foundations of effective teams, is a high degree of trust. And we tend to trust people we like, and we like people who we have things in common with. So for a leader, one of the things that we need to do is get actually personal with people to find areas of common ground and things we share. So you can start building a personal relationship and generate. Sometimes I ask the leader a question, is it more important to be liked or be respected? And almost invariably, the answer is to be respected. And that's not really necessarily a wrong answer. And I'm not sure it's important that it's essential that you're liked, but you do have to be likable, because if you're not likable, it's unlikely people are going to trust you. It's really hard to trust somebody you don't like. We had a high degree of trust in our team, and we gave each other gifts. And it was the most amazing, Gary, it was the most amazing experience of my career. 6 years I spent with this team, and it was the highlight of my career. We developed intellectual property. We delivered stuff. We wrote books. We did assessments. We delivered engagements for clients. We did such amazing work.
But you could not have done all that and accomplish as much without having a high degree of trust, being open with our mistakes, being personal with people, finding common ground, being likable.
Yeah, and then being willing to give and to receive feedback. And then fast forward 10 years later, this was a couple of years ago, that I happened to be back in the city where I had worked with this team on a Thanksgiving weekend. I called one of the senior team members and I said, hey, Ken, I'm going to be in town on Thanksgiving weekend. Do you want to get together? So we met for breakfast on a Saturday or Sunday morning of Thanksgiving weekend. And I asked him, so how was your Thanksgiving? He says, oh, Kim, it was great. The family was together. He said, hey, I got to tell you, we have this little tradition where we go around the table and we share what we're thankful for. So we're going around the table and it gets to me. And I said, I've got two things. He said, number one, I'm thankful for all of you. I'm thankful for my family. But the second thing I want to share with you that I'm thankful for, he said, as I reflect on my career, there was a team that I was part of that was such a special part of my career. It's been the highlight of my career. And he talked about this team. As he's telling the story, I almost started crying. I mean, it was so touching to me. And so his memory of that environment, that team environment, and our accomplishments and our relationships has such a profound effect on him as it had on me. Part of it goes back to Vicky, who demonstrated that leadership to step up and really impress upon me that importance of giving and receiving feedback. So to me, that experience has shaped my career and my life to a very great extent.
You said it twice, willing to give and receive feedback. It's kind of easy to give feedback if you're in an authority position, but sometimes people are hesitant to give feedback to other people who don't report to them. Sometimes they think that feedback is threatening in a way, or fearing what they might say.
Yeah, it is. It can be threatening, but I'm not sure I agree that it's easy for people in authority to give feedback. I don't think very many people give frequent feedback, and they don't give effective feedback. So, I mean, frequency is one of the things that makes it important. So, I mean, there's research that would say, the former research from psychology said that the ratio of positive to constructive feedback should be 4-to-1. In other words, you should be recognizing and giving specific feedback on things people are doing well, catch them doing well, 4 times as often as you're giving them constructive feedback and kind of what I call course correction. That ratio is flipped for most managers. In fact, they frequently don't give any feedback until they have to do the course correction. And then it's like things have gotten to the point where, okay, I can't hold back any longer. I've got to say something to this person. I think many leaders are reluctant. They feel uncomfortable giving feedback. When they do, it's often not immediate. And that's another thing that makes feedback effective, is that delayed feedback is much less effective than immediate feedback. So you want to do it immediately after that behavior. And you want to be specific with it. It's not enough to say, hey, Gary, great job on the podcast, right? What I want to do is say, Gary, really nice the way you jumped in. You kind of gave some context and richness around what I was saying. You asked me great follow-up questions. And when I'm being specific like that, that's much more effective for you. So immediate, specific, personal, authentic. We get back to the authentic thing. If I really want people to succeed, then why should I be reluctant to give feedback? I want people to be successful, and it's not about me. It's about them. So I should never hesitate to give feedback, but managers do because they make it about themselves.
It's interesting that with feedback, some managers treat it like a rare commodity, just saying, hey, you did a great job when you did blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Or you did exactly what I needed you to do. They don't think to do that. And I think a key that you just mentioned was the doing frequent feedback, both constructive and corrective. Doing that makes it easier to be open
Right.
with doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
There's something else that you modeled when you pulled your team together the next day after Vicky talked with you.
Mm-hmm.
You modeled that it's okay to give feedback to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And encourage people to do it. And I think that's something that we all need to do if we're on a team, is to make it clear that you want feedback, you're welcoming it. If you're in a management position and you're trying to do better with leading, letting people know, hey, I'm trying to get better at this. Any feedback you have would be so helpful for me. It makes all the difference.
Yeah, it does. You're absolutely right.
Part 3, three-legged stool. I often say that we practice leadership from the perspective of a role. And as you move up in an organization, that role becomes more and more complex, and it requires more and more skill. It's one thing to build a cohesive team. It's another thing to lead a department, a business unit, or even a whole company. Kim advises us on how we can improve how we lead and how we develop our leadership. Here's Kim.
In my coaching practice, I'm often working with leaders, and these are typically pretty senior people. I mean, CEOs and C-suite people, senior executives. And even at that level, people struggle with their level of influence. Now, some people equate influence with leadership. They think they're synonymous. I actually don't think they are. I think you can be influential on a one-on-one level, but leadership implies a group. And, if you look at the roots of leadership, it goes back to generals in the army, in an army, getting a whole army to move. And that's what you were trying to do as a leader, is we're getting a group of people to move. Now, often that's attitudinally, it's not move physically, but it becomes much more complicated when we're dealing with a team. And it can be just a small team, or it can be a department, it can be a company, it can be a country, a leader. And we have to get this large intact group to move en masse, embrace the change that we're seeking as a leader. And so that leadership is much more than just influencing at a one-on-one level. But influence is important. It's an important part of leadership. If you're going to be an effective leader, you have to have the chops to lead. Once you become a leader, once you're in that role as a leader, you have to be able to lead, but you also have to be able to get elected. If you want to be the governor of a state, you got to be able to govern, but before that, you have to get elected. And those are two different skill sets. And I think some people are really good in one. They're great leaders, but they're not really good at effectively self-promoting and getting elected. And other people are great self-promoters, but they're not effective leaders. And I think the best have both of that. So often I'm working with somebody who's already got there, but they need the leadership skills, or they're kind of feel limited or struggling to get to the next level, and they need to know how to market themselves and to get to that level. In any case, influence is important. So to be influential, you first have to be seen as credible, right? If you're not credible, you're not going to be influential. And credibility there's multiple dimensions of that. It's understanding my domain of expertise. If my domain is human resources, I need to be seen as highly competent in my domain of expertise. I also need to understand my business and my business model and our competitive landscape and the industry in general, and then just general business, which includes knowing something about finance, which is the language of business. If I don't have any of those things, I'm not going to really be seen as credible, and I'm therefore not going to be very influential. The second thing, so I kind of look at this as a three-legged stool. So being credible, then having relationships with people who matter. You can be highly credible, but if you don't build relationships, your influence doesn't go very far. Your influence actually extends as far as the network of influencers that you've influenced. And so building relationships is key. And we could talk about any of those two legs of the stool, credibility or building relationships. But the third leg of the stool is the one that I think, if I have a piece of advice, this is what I would focus on, because it's the one that's often overlooked. And that's having a unique point of view. If you don't have something different to say, there's really no reason for anyone to listen to you. And how can it be influential if there's no reason to listen to you? And so to develop that unique point of view, it kind of goes back to the very first thing I was talking about in terms of when my mentor said, play the damn tapes. And being reflective, the part of being reflective is considering, what do I really believe about this topic, this issue? So my story with Vicky was about performance management. Now, you could ask me and we could spend an hour and you could get my point of view on performance management, why it doesn't work so well in companies, what can make it work better, and so forth. I've thought a lot about that. I've developed a point of view about performance management, which is in my domain of expertise. That's a thing that also I often am encouraging executives to do. I ask them, what do you see differently about the competitive landscape that you're operating in? What do you see differently than other people on the executive team do about the strategic direction your company is taking? What do you see differently about your unique value proposition, or whatever the issue is? But if you haven't really thought about it and developed your own thoughts and script so that you can articulate your point of view, I don't think you're going to be seen as highly influential. I guess that's a piece of advice I would give anybody who aspires to be a leader. To be a leader, first, you need to be influential. There's more to it than that, but being influential will help you get elected. It'll also help you once you're elected, so to speak, and in those leadership roles.
Yeah, it seems like the influence is more of a consequence than doing or practicing the act of leading. It's being credible requires doing certain things, building relationships requires doing certain things, and having a unique point of view is something that is acquired over time. But when you do all three of those effectively, then it seems like as a consequence, you have influence.
Yeah, a natural outcome of doing those things, I think, is to be seen as influential.
John Maxwell is so popular for many people, but he's famous for his saying, leadership is influence and nothing more. It's a good conversation starter, but I think leadership is something that you do to help other people develop and grow mentally and morally, and influence is a consequence.
Yeah, you're right. I agree with you that leadership is really, a lot of it is about helping other people be successful. And so good leaders are good coaches. They help other people be successful. And they have a generosity of spirit in that, in helping other people be successful. And that serves them well in their own career as well.
Yeah, it's bi-directional. The act of leading, it not only influences, using that word, other people, but it affects you as well.
Absolutely.
My thanks to Kim Ruyle. If you'd like to learn more about Kim, go to the show notes. And if you have a question, comment, go to unlabelleadership.com, click the message icon, and you can leave a message up to 1 minute. I'd like to thank those who contribute to the show. Your contributions help offset some of the production costs, which makes a difference because this is a volunteer podcast. Mostly, I'd like to thank you for listening to the show. Until next time, lead on.